again, I should hear no clicking. No clicking. So, yep. Maximize your real estate is generally what you want to do. Just grab these and get rid of them. 3 things here: attribute editor, modeling toolkit, and channel layer box editor. Now, fortunately, I'm going to have to go up and down on here. I might just grab that out like that. I can kind of move this around here. Okay, just so you can see the tools that I'll be using. Now, you'll notice that I've got a couple extra things on here, a couple extra buttons, which is central pivot and show all objects. Central pivot's under modify, and if I hold Control and Shift, you'll notice that it'll add it to the bar here. Another button that I love is show all, and again, Control and Shift. If I click that, it'll add it to the toolbar here. I tend to have the poly modeling toolbar open 90% of the time, so I just add extra stuff to that. I'll delete this for the moment, because I already got that there. But central pivot and show all are by far and away the buttons that you'll use most. So once you've got that started, just a couple of extra tips. Settings and preferences, so just under Windows, settings, preferences, preferences. Interesting. Try it again. Okay, let's just forget we did that, because it's not working. You'll notice that Maya just does things randomly like that, and there's no explanation to what's happened. I can't explain it, so don't worry, we'll cover that later on. It's basically just going to say just make sure that it's set up with Z in the up axis. So generally as a default, Y set as the up axis. When you bring things across into Unreal, ideally you want Z as the up axis, just as if you would if you were, say, 3D printing or something like that. On a side note, if you use Unity, Z isn't the up axis. Regardless, let's just crack on. So we've got this toolbar here, and down here is what is known as the platonic solids, or just, so if we put that in and we hit F, F will zoom in to that object and make it full screen. And you can see here that it's a square. We can have spheres, cylinders. We can also have any number of objects like this. Personally, the 3 that I use the most are sphere, cube, and cylinder. Everything else you can pretty much make out of those, I find, and you just want to simplify things as much as possible. Another way of doing that is you can hold Shift and right, and then you get a context menu, and then I can just create I can create a cube like that. And if you're really fast, you can just like that. No one can see. You're too fast. Cylinder with this here, if I want to select faces, I right click and I hit face, and I can select the faces and I can delete them, and now I've got a disk. It's not exactly the same as a regular disk, but for all intents and purposes, I'll use this disk. It'll get the job done. So again, right click, hit face, Now I can hit all of the faces. Oh, crap. I can hit all of the faces. And if I want to get rid of, if I just want to get the top face, I can just delete or I can unselect rather the other faces. That's a really good way of going about things, especially when you have super complex objects. So if I just want a single plane, that's one way of doing it. Now I can hit plane like that, and I can have it with a mesh with multiple polys on here, or I can just grab this and just go to smooth and change it to say 3, and I think you'll find that these are pretty much identical now. A lot of what you do is just, again, you'll just get within a workflow that the idea is that you do so much of this that it just becomes second nature, that you don't even think it. You can just have your beats blaring in your ears, and you can just go through a list of, I need to get this model done, this model done, this model done, this model done, and it just becomes so ingrained that you're not even thinking about it. And that's where ideally you want to be. Looking forward to the future in terms of, employment prospects as a poly modeler, they're really good in terms of if you want to do VR stuff. They're, and at the very minimum, if you work in any other field, at some point in the time, especially if you're doing VR, you'll need to work in polys. So this is a really valuable skill set. And these are, because VR works at 90 frames a second, you need to make everything run as efficiently as possible. And this is the best way to do it. But that's just a side note. Let's get back to this. So yeah, as you can see, if you poly smooth the face, if you go up a division, it'll go up. If you go down to 1, it'll go to divide by 1, 3, etc. Object mode, if it's going crazy sometimes, Maya decides to go crazy for whatever reason, just right click and go to object mode, and it tends to sort itself out. Shading, wireframe on shaded. Just for this tutorial, I'll put wireframe on shaded. Wireframe, yeah, sure. It just will make it a lot easier to see how many polys are going on in the scene. You can see here as well with the vertex count, how many vertexes are in a scene with the 202, and how many faces we're chasing. Sorry, how many faces? So a face is 1 poly essentially, and how many tries. So with Unreal, we care about tries. Essentially, how many faces will dictate how many tries, but for simple understanding today, we'll just refer to everything in faces or polys. So the poly count for this particular object 64, the poly count for this one is 100. So that's a 10 by 10 grid, so that's going to be 100. How many are in this grid? Can anyone count? 8. Yep, great. Yeah, so it's just 8 eighths and 10 tenths. Cool. Again, we're just going to start basic and start ramping it up, but there might be a couple of ways that I show how to do things that aren't shown in the Lynda tutorial. So these might be some handy tips and tricks that might just speed up your modeling process. A lot of the time you can just when selecting faces is a good one as well. We've got the paint selection tool for selecting faces. You can select like this. If you hold B down, you can change the size of the brush. This is exactly the same in Mudbox. So by holding B down, you can raise or lower the radius of the brush, and then you can kind of just paint onto here. And then if you want to hit extrude, which is Control E, you can bring them out like this. And you grab the last of the faces, you can shrink them down, do this. Yeah. Have interesting sort of, I don't know what that is. It could be 1/2 of a hammer, who knows, I don't know. Just again, probably covering some basics. We all know that W is to move manipulator, essentially. E is to rotate, and R is to resize it, or to scale it. If you hit plus or down, that will change the modifiers here to the size of it. Generally, you scale things universally like that. Ooh, crap. With that, you can always go to the channel box editor if you want to scale them, I guess, to a round number, which is always nice. You can go at 10 if you select all 3 of those. Like that, works quite well. Likewise, if you're rotating objects, generally, especially with architectural stuff, you generally rotate on the 90 or the 45. So if you could hit -45 there, that's pretty good. And you can scale this 1. If you scale it, then you might want to scale your modifiers as well, just so it's a little bit more manageable. Shortcuts that I use, generally F when I'm wanting just to focus on that singular object. So if I want to, let's go up to 5. So with this, we can, if I want to make this a bit more interesting, to copy, generally most programs it's copy and paste, so Control C, Control V. In Maya though, it's Control D. That's going to throw you a loop. So Control D is what we use here. And then I can peel off another copy. So what I'm going to do is, just to start off with, I'll just quickly as well, sorry, we'll do the central pivot stuff first. What we'll do is, so if 2 things, I generally, as a rule in any CAD program, like to have the minimum amount of information on the screen as possible. Oh, Dan's just snuck out the back. God. We're recording all this, by the way, Dan. So,
Hey guys.
hey, that's Dan.
You need a coffee?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, thanks, Dan. Excellent. You'll notice, if you notice the tone of my voice change, it's all due to caffeine. So with this, I tend to like to, like I was saying, hide and show, have the minimum amount of things displayed on screen. Generally what's good is to have an outline, which is over here. Because I'm lacking screen real estate at the moment, I'm not going to play with this too much. Needless to say, as we were doing with naming conventions before, you should always name your cube. So let's say brow underscore snowy underscore cube. Let's call it cube A01. I think with Maya, just from memory, you can actually, if you type in, I just type in this, right? It'll automatically update it to 02, which is really handy. And the other cool thing that I've noticed is that if I type in with spaces here, cube A 3. So I've just put in spaces, it'll automatically do the underscores in between. So that's really handy to know. Now that we've got these here, I'm just going to highlight these and hit Control H. So that's hidden them. And just for the moment, I'm going to, so if I want to bring one back, I can just hit Shift H, and that will bring it back. I can select more, hit Shift H. If I hit Control H, I can hide them. And the other thing is I can hit all on show all objects in my shelf here, and it'll bring them all back. If I just want to focus in on one like this, I can hit Alt H, and that will hide everything but that. So I'll go through that again. So show all is showing everything in that scene. If I hit Alt H, that singularly shows that object. If I go into my outliner over here, by the way, you can hit the outliner just over here, just down the side here, hit this on and off, that's the outliner. If I hit Shift H when I'm doing that, I can show all of them. Right now I'm just going to focus on one. I'm just going to focus on this one here. And if I hit F, you'll notice that's the pivot there in the center of it. If I want to change this for whatever reason, I hit Insert, and I can move this all around, and I can have the pivot here. I would almost never do this unless I wanted to rotate around that particular point. The general rule, though, is if I want to have a pivot, I might want it to have it at the ground of the object, so I could snap it to the grid. So if I hit V here, V is snap to vertice, so you'll notice it's snapping to all corners of that cube there. So if I hit Insert, again, that will have that point snap to the vertice, and at that point I can hit X, and I can snap that point to any point on the grid. So if I've got something, say, way up here, and I want to snap that to the grid, that's not going to work. I've got to see the grid in order to snap to it. It'll snap to the grid here, and you'll notice that it's positioned perfectly with the grid. If I hit spacebar, just quickly, I can see everything in a 4-plane perspective. So that's the top, that's the side, that's the other side, or I think it's side Z, side X. Generally, as a general rule, I tend to model in 3D space just because it's easier. With that, I can also go along a curve. So if I go, this is one of the rare instances where I'll use the curves and surfaces. So this is all NURBS modeling. You rarely do NURBS modeling in Maya, I find. There are just better programs for it, like Rhino. So if I want to snap this across the curve, I'll go to my modifiers, see that the center pivot is along that vertice there at the bottom corner. So if I hit C, you'll notice that the modifier, so that goes to a circle, and I should be able to snap this to the curve. And you'll see it runs really nicely along that curve. There are reasons where this will become useful a little bit later on. But just to recap, if I want to snap along a grid, it's X. If I want to snap along a curve, it's C. And if I want to, let's bring this across. Oh, crap. If I select nothing and make another cube over here, and I want to snap it to one of the points there, I'll hit V, and I can snap it to any of the vertices on that cube there, which is kind of useful. I'll jump to the other example in a sec, but just so you see about combining objects together. delete this. See, if you hit Control-C, you'll get this student version file, and it's really a pain in the butt. So I'd hit Control-D is a way faster way of duplicating objects. So if I want to combine objects, just quickly, I'll cover this in a tiny bit more detail, but I just want to show you while I've got both the cubes up there at the moment. Yeah. I can hear clicking. Everyone should just be focusing up here. So if I try and combine this object, these two cubes together, cube 1 and cube 2, I'll just hide that, Control-H. I'm not going to have a good time. If I hit spacebar, okay, here's another thing. Hotbox controls are quite useful. However, if you see this, there's just way too much information on screen for that to be valuable to me. I don't need fluids or hair or effects or Bifrost fluids in anything that I'm doing here. It's just way too much information. So generally, if you want to do this, if you'd prefer using hotbox controls, if you go hotbox, show modeling, modeling only. Let's go over that again. So holding spacebar down and see hotbox, show modeling, modeling only. It deletes all the other stuff that I don't need, which is really nice. So I'll try and flick between context menus, which is holding shift and right control down. And depending on what context I have, it'll change. So if I select nothing, you'll notice the menu changes. This is by far and away the fastest way to model. I only found out about it recently, but I've noticed that the speed in which I model is a lot better. If you don't feel as comfortable doing that, holding down hotbox might be a bit better. So that's just holding down spacebar and you get all the menus. This gives you a little bit more to work with, but a lot of this stuff, this is not context driven. So what I mean by context driven is this is all the objects that I'm likely to use because, or all the actions I'm likely to take because nothing's selected. As soon as I select something, you'll notice that all of these change. So context menus are by far and away the simplest, but if you prefer to do hotbox, it's still good, still valid. So you can see all these menus here, and finally, you've got the shelf and also the pull down. Thank you, sir. Beautiful. Nectar of the gods. Oh, still hot. Beautiful. So yeah, there are essentially 3 or 4 ways, depending on how you look at it, to do the same thing. So context menus are holding down shift and right click, and that will just give you the basic context. So as soon as you click something now, another set of menus comes up showing you what you can do, and this is by far the simplest way of proceeding in my humble opinion. Alternatively, you've got the hotbox, which is holding space down, and like we discussed before, this is initially what you get with hotbox displays. It's just way too many options. For a heads-up display, you want to minimize the amount of information so you can, without thinking, get to the point you need rapidly. So in this circumstance, I would hit go from show all to show modeling and modeling only. And on top of this, you've got your modeling shelf and also the drop-down menus here as well. So there's so many options that you have, but realistically, you'll only use a handful. So getting back to this, you'll notice that we've got 2 cubes here, cube 1 and cube 2. And if I want to combine them together, I can't until I hit combine. So one way of doing that, I'll just show you with the hotbox controls in this case. So if I hit spacebar and I go, mesh, and I go combine. Now what you'll find is if I go in object mode, when I select them, they're both combined. And you can see in the cube here, it's created a new entity called cube 3. So that's cube 1, cube 2, now I've gone to cube 3. And if I wanted to join these together, I can just hit face, and if I hold shift, it will select the other face. And now I can use my modeling toolkit. In this case, I might just get this coming down. Just make this as small as possible. Oh, it's creating my second. Move this across. You can also hit combine here, but if I hit bridge, that'll bridge them together. And you'll find, this is why it's really critical to preserve your real estate. You'll find that you've got all these menus. Basically every part of this, I've used the real estate as effectively as possible. I've got my head up vert count here, or poly count here. I've got my outliner here, and I can turn that off now. But my attribute menu here, and you'll notice that these are combined now. And if I choose to hit Control E, which is a shortcut key for extrude, I can extrude that out. And if I change the divisions to 1, I can create a T like that. So that's pretty simple. So it's defaulted to 9. Don't know why that is. Just be aware of that. Sometimes it defaults. And if you hit that like that. So that's great if you're doing hard modeling, but what happens if I want to create more organic models? If I hit this now and I go into smooth, I'm gonna have something that looks roughly like my nose. And that's not particularly great. It's not exactly the form that I wanted. So if we go back to, we put these back on. So I'm selecting these again in the outliner, and I just hit Shift H. I get that confused. Or alternatively, I could just hit All, and that gives me the curve there. Get to the curve a little bit later on. I'm just going to show how to smooth and when to keep things hard. So if I hit Control D, and you'll notice that it's just automatically created the next version up there, which is great. And I'll just bring this across like that. I know, so they're all like this, which is great. So on this one, this model here, I'm gonna hit 3. So 3, as you probably know, is smoothing the mesh. And it'll simulate how many faces, so it's gone from 6 faces to 96 faces. Realistically though, if you smooth a mesh, it's not going to exponentially affect Unreal. So if you've got a smooth mesh versus you've got a not smooth mesh, the maths doesn't linearly translate into, because I've got 96 faces theoretically here, that it's going to be 96 divided by 6. Quickly. 16. Wow. Wait. It's not going to be 16 times slower, is what I'm saying. Is the way that Unreal will compute it. You're not going to... It's not a bad thing to have smooth meshes. But, so the question is, maybe I want this cube just to have a nice sort of radius. When I smooth it, I don't want it to turn into a ball because that's not ideal. So what I can do here is if I hit a bevel, just get rid of the outliner. For some reason, it starts in 0.5. I guess it depends on the scale of the cube, but generally I want 0.1 and lower for my bevel. I can add extra segments here to smooth it out, but realistically, I think that's kind of a waste of polys in this case. So what I'll do rather is if I keep it like that, and if I hit G, so G is a really great shortcut, and that will just apply the last action that you did to the next mesh. I've hit G here, it'll do the same thing again. If I hit that at 0.1. So right now I've got a faceted mesh here, so it looks like it's chamfered edges. If this was a physical object, if I want a nice radius, if I hit 3, that will smooth it, and now I've got beautifully smoothed edges there. And if I show you this without the wireframe, you can see here they've got just a flat box, a beautifully ratted cube, and a chamfered cube. Although the geometry of this one and this one is identical. One is smooth, one is not smooth. Now, after the break, in the next class, I'll show you how to preserve this smoothing when you're bringing it across to Unreal. And that's all about face normals and smoothing. I'll keep everything with a focus on Maya for the moment until we move into Mudbox, just to keep things nice and consistent. But right now, I guess that's what you really need to know, is that if I smooth this one here, it'll turn, without this definition on the edges, it'll just turn into a circle. Turn into a sphere. So it's really clear, it's really critical that you have boundaries that it can smooth up against, I guess. Now with this, so that's a really good thing about smoothing. Another example I was going to show, I might just hold that down. Actually, no, what we'll do is we'll grab this, grab this. This is a pretty terrible curve. Might just control vertexes so we can edit curves in... crap. Select all... Always go back to object mode if it goes crazy. Just as a default. You can import curves from programs like Illustrator. Just be aware of how many nodes you have. You want to use the minimum amount of nodes. You could potentially import them from other programs like Rhino. I haven't tested that out. But by next week, we can tell you that. We can use Rhino curves. I'd say with some confidence that you can. I've imported them from other programs like Alias and they've worked out. So Rhino curves should work too. With this, we want some nice curvature here. Basically, you want, again, like everything that we're showing you, you want the minimum amount of control points as possible. The more control points you have, the more issues you're going to have, the more memory that you use. So if you kind of keep that in the back of your mind as a mantra, you want to have the absolute bare minimum of control points and data to get the outcome that you want. This allows you to more effectively manipulate things and deform meshes, and it'll also mean the amount of memory used is less. And getting back to what we were saying about levels of details, which are self-creating, if you want to go up and down those levels of detail, having less points of control, or realistically, the bare minimum amounts of points of control will make that process a lot easier. So when it's scaling up and down those levels of detail in Unreal automatically, it won't distort or deform the mesh in irregular ways. So now we've got this curve here, and we just want to extrude along a curve. Now this is one of the rare instances where realistically, when you're doing NURBS or when you're doing polys, you choose one or the other. Generally what you do is you bring your NURBS in, you convert them to polys, then you go from there. But this is one of the very, very rare occasions where polys and the world of polys and NURBS come together as one. So again, generally, as a general rule, I have my channel box layer editor here. And if I'm going to rotate anything at the 90, I just get it roughly there, and then I hit 90 just to fix it up. Now, if I hit C, as we recall, so C is snap to curve. Sometimes this takes a little bit longer to get, but just bear with it, and it will go around that curve really nicely like that. So that's in line with that. Now, if I select both of these, I can hear clicking. If you could just focus on what I'm doing currently, that would be great. If you want to click along later on when you're watching this up on YouTube, that's great. But for now, just focusing up here. I'm noticing that if I extrude along this curve, you can see it's ramping up around there. So either I can modify the curve, which is okay, or alternatively I can modify the poly just so it kind of gets in line. Again, this is very approximate. Everything in Maya is very approximate. If it looks right, it is right, basically, is the way to think about it. In programs like Rhino, you're going to have very strict tolerances because it provides manufacturing data that has to be very, it's compliant to engineering standards. In Maya, this is compliant only to visualization standards. Having said that, though, you can use this and export out as STLs and a variety of other formats to 3D print, or as Dan will go through, you can slice them and then laser cut them. But for intents and purposes of Unreal, we need it to look visually accurate, not accurate for the forms of manufacturing. So the tolerance is quite low. It's quite flexible. So you're really prioritizing flexibility and speed over accuracy is where I was going with that. So getting back to this maneuver here, if I select both at once and then I hit face, again if I hit shift, I will remove the selection of the current selected faces. Actually, no, I won't. I'll do the opposite. Hopefully, if I hit Control E, it's playing funny. Get that up to 90. Okay. I've gone the. Okay, I might have gone the wrong way on the curve. Let's try that again. Sometimes when this does happen, that's good that it happened then, so it's probably, if it happens to me, it's going to happen to you. We go through that again and we hit the other side of the curve. And again, hitting F. Modifier. So yeah, again, everyone knows the modifiers should be by heart. So W-E-R. So just hitting W. And if I can get close enough to that curve, you'll notice it's snap to curve. And if I orientate it this way, so roughly around there, it should be pretty good. So if I grab these again, and I hit faces, and I delete that. And yeah, if I go from the start of the curve, so that's the start of the curve, that's the end of the curve, so it was doing a loop before, and I changed the divisions from 9 to say 30, you'll notice that it smooths out really, really nicely. Now, if I try and smooth this hitting 3, what do you think is going to happen? I'm going to guess that this is going to look really funky. And it is. If you look at that, it's really funky geometry. It goes in on itself, it's no good. Likewise with the end section here. So I've got a couple of ways of fixing that up. The easiest way to do it is, okay, I'll go through both of them. So I can hit edge. If I grab this edge loop here, I can just move this closer to the edge. And what you'll notice is that, like we hit with the bevel before, it'll create a boundary so that when we smooth that, it'll be a much nicer smooth. You'll notice that you still get a tiny bit of distortion there. That's because it's going from quads here to tris. There's really no way effectively I've found about getting around that. If you do send this to Mudbox later on, which we'll do now, send to Mudbox as new scene, it will give you an error warning. This is one of the few cases that I'd say that says high valiancy vertex. In this case, I just go keep this mesh. See how it's getting to a point where it becomes tris, goes from quads to tris. This is the rare instance that I'd say don't fix it up, because there is really no solution that I found that's effective. As long as you're not, as long as that part of the mesh isn't super important, I wouldn't worry about it too much. These problems are something we'll deal with a little bit later on, but right now we'll just go keep this mesh. And then you'll find it will import into Mudbox there. So you'll find that this part here is really nice, opposed to this part here that kind of looks a bit crappy, or just looks a bit funny. So you can see that's really distorted there. So just showing you that, just to show you upstream, you can have problems if you don't correctly create good topology that you can deform. So, like I said, you can bring this edge closer to the edge. So this edge loop closer to that edge to create a boundary. The other option is that I can go Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop. It's one of my favorite tools, and it'll create an edge loop perpendicular to what you select. So I can just add another edge loop there, and it will have exactly the same effect. And as you can see here, it's cleaned it up quite nicely. It's not perfect, but it's relatively clean. So that's what I'm after, is relatively clean topology, which is roughly evenly spaced along. So I potentially could have another, so I could hit G again and create another one here just to create roughly even spacing. That's, as a general rule, what you want. Sometimes when you're creating the, let's get rid of this, go back to our outliner, just show all the tick. You notice with cubes here that have just got the bevel on them, or the fillet, that they are not even. These are, I mean, that's the rule, that's the exception to the rule when you're creating edges like that. But as a general rule, you want to break up your meshes as equally as possible. Just so when you bring them into something like Mudbox, or alternatively you bring them into Unreal and you've got to change the levels of detail, they scale up and they scale down effectively, and they don't distort and go crazy. I've got basically an hour left, so we'll just keep going through these modeling techniques, and we might show a few more tips and tricks. So we'll just get rid of that for the moment. So again, Control H, one of my favorite go-tos. Trying to think of an object that I've got that could be interesting. Microphone that's in front of me might have, everyone can see this. Just hold it up there. We'll focus on this barrel part. We'll add a couple of circular parts here, and we'll go through that. So what I might start off with is a circle here. Sorry, a circle, try a sphere, Marcus. And what I might do is I might just bring that up like that. And roughly speaking, I've already started to get a fall that I'm happy with, right? Within a couple of seconds. So I'm pretty happy with that. Note here, I've got a bit of a curve where these two where you've got the mesh material and your body casing. Thanks. So I might use an edge loop here. So just so people can see, if I smooth that out, it's going to look like that. If I keep it rough, it's going to look like that. So not too much of a difference. So I got that pill there. If I go edit mesh, insert edge loop, and I go here, and I insert another edge loop, and I go here, and I insert one more, and I focus in on that. I might just get rid of the outline because I don't need you for the tick. What I can, oh crap, do more of that. So I kind of bring that out like that, and I bring the next one out just a little bit, and maybe I'll make one more edge loop here, and maybe just one more here. What I can kind of do is, again, note that I'm using the scale modifier in the center. If I use just one of these, it's just going to go a little bit Burko like that. So generally when we scale all in one direction. So the yellow one in the center. So I just want to create that lip. And if I do that, and I can also just bring that down a little bit like that. So it's got that really distinctive lip. Seems to be nice for the lip. If I hit 3, it's created that lip. Don't really happy with it. Not really happy with that. Looks like a little bit of a dome, whereas this is kind of elongated a little bit more. At this point, if you're just starting out with this and you find selection a little bit difficult, it's probably best that you go into the 3-point views. And at this point, I can either bring it up like that, or alternatively, I can scale it up like that and then bring it up like that. It looks a little bit more like an egg shape. In this case, I might just bring it up incrementally. And because it's smoothing it out, I can get a little bit more control over it. And this section here, I can kind of tighten up. So I'm just zooming in there, just so I can tighten it up a little bit there. And if I wanted to see this curves coming in here, realistically it would come in a little bit more. So if I want to add a bit more control there, I go edit mesh, mesh tools, insert edge loop, I can just add it in here, and that's kind of looking a little bit more like it. So again, hit spacebar, get back to this view here, and you can kind of see that it looks that looks pretty good. Yeah, we're pretty happy with that little section there going into there. And the overall, we can fix that up at the bottom in a tick, but right now we'll just kind of work from the top and work our way down. So you'll notice you've got circles. Circles here, let's call them dials, if you will. We're not going to worry too much about the little notches on the dials because they're... Sorry about the audio recording of this, whoever's watching this at home. The dials, there's little ridges in the dials. They can be, because they're under 1mm, we'll take care of them with bump mapping. It's probably a little bit too much information for Maya going into Unreal at this stage. And realistically, unless you were going to do this at the size, if you were going to increase the size of this or the scale of this to the size of a house, then maybe you'd use geometry to do it. But because at this current stage of this size, it's less than 1mm, we'll just use bump mapping later on. So, so we've got this, which is great. In order to do the modeling toolkit, now this is only in 2018, I should note. There are other ways of doing this in 2017, but this is just so good that it's not worth doing in any other way. Oh crap. There we go. Just going to add some more divisions to this for the moment. Again, just because... So I've smoothed out the mesh a bit. Because I'm adding more detail, I'm going to need more divisions, and this will be self-explanatory in a sec. But I've chosen to go into the side mode here just because I need them aligned for the moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get these looking more like squares. Now, technically, this isn't probably the best way of doing it, but for what I need this to be, this will work out nicely. Now, I might use this selection tool here, so that's a paint selection tool. And I should note that if you use the lasso tool here, and I lasso around here, I select that, the issue that you'll have, going to this section here, is that it will select what's on the other side. So I only select it here. So I'll try again. If I select here, right? If I go around the other side, it's selected everything around the other side, which is really a pain in the bum. So I tend to use paint selection tool here. It's really useful. And if I hit B, the B modifier, as in Mudbox, it'll change the size of the brush for what I want to select. So if I select, just, yeah, when you get to this point here, well, it's just going a bit giddy, I don't know why. Blink on my mouse. So everyone knows that holding Alt and middle click is to pan around the scene. So this isn't quite as square. I might just go through and get this section here. So roughly, when you want to create a circle, you have to create a square, which seems quite counterintuitive, but trust me on this. So we've got something that's roughly square looking. If I hold shift down, I hit right click. This is the context menu appears, and then I want to hit circularize components. And then, ooh, that's looking a bit nasty. After all that. Interesting. Sorry, I'm a little bit new with this way of doing things, and I've just found that it gets the other way of doing this is booleans, but this tends to get a cleaner mesh. For the moment, we'll just skip this and I'll show you on a cube. Rather than do this wrong, we'll just fix it up. It's all going to crap. So I'll just show you on a cube what I meant to do there. Add divisions, and we'll just go add divisions to 3. So generally it works best if you've got squares like this, in a nice grid. If we hit faces, so if you do stuff like this, you end up selecting stuff and kind of goes like that. It's not great. Anyway, this is really throwing me for the lip so hard. So if I go here, go to context menu, shift right click, and I go to circularize components, and I go like that. Now you'll notice that it will circularize this for me. This is new to 2018. Like I said, I've not used this much, but I found it performs significantly better than the old way that I was doing it, especially when it comes to UV mapping. So this is why, even though I'm not that familiar with it, I'm really keen to show you this today. Because what happens if I hit Control E and I go like this, you'll notice that I get a really nice clean mesh. And if I hit right click there, you'll notice that mode, that it kind of works out reasonably well. The old school way of doing this I'll also show you, which is you go like this, you add a bunch bevel, the old school way of doing this was you hit, you grab one object, you grab another object, and then you subtract one from the other, otherwise known as a Boolean approach. Roughly speaking, that's roughly the same size. So you select one, then the other, and then you go, where is it? I'm trying to use one of these menus now. Extract, mirror, smooth, reduce, extrude, bridge. So I'm just trying to find, I might just use one of these menus. You can see how rarely I use this. There is one other way, but it's quite manual that I'll show you in a moment. But right now, Here's the issue that you'll find is there's just so many options that you have to play with that.
Mesh.
What's that?
Mesh boolean.
Where am I looking?
Separate.
It's right under my nose. There you go. I've selected them in the wrong order. And you can see that. Now, that's the other way of doing it. What you'll notice, though, is when you smooth it out, you get really ugly geometry like that. Whereas when you smooth this one out, you actually get pretty nice geometry, like you get pretty nice curvature there. And if I want to fix that up again, I could probably insert an edge loop. And just tighten that out like that. But you can see how, if you compare these two together, that it's apples and oranges. That's the Boolean approach, which is terrible, and then there's this approach. The old school way of doing it, the way that I used to do it, which is something I'm just going to show you quickly and I don't expect you to do, is you create a circle like this. Keep in mind the circularized tool's only been around for one generation, so it's not widely used. So you just get it roughly there, and then you start, literally, you go and you pull vertexes roughly around like that, and you basically do this, and it takes frickin' ever. But like that's more like if you really want a feature to do quickly. Again, I would not expect anyone to do this because then it's painful to say the very least. And I'll try where possible not to use manual processes. But yeah, this circularized feature is pretty good. But in order to do that, you actually have to prepare your mesh in a way that works well, which I didn't do. So just be aware that, yeah, if you want to use some of these features, you actually prepare a mesh in a way that works. We'll just go for a moment. Actually, no, there. This is one other method which there's Dan hates, but I'm going to show you anyway. This is the so let's say you've got a bit of scan data like this. Let's say you get scan data and it's just poly soup. You've just got triangles everywhere. It's completely you can't use it in any way, shape, or form. So what I might do is I'll go into my box and we'll create a new thing like that. Look at the ball. I'll go into Mudbox in more detail, but we're just using this to create something ridiculous for the moment. Make a fat ball. Mudbox is so much fun. Send to my using. I won't save any of that. Here's my big fat ball. Okay, let's say you get this, or alternatively, like you've scanned in something, 3D scanned it, you've used photogrammetry, you've got something off the Thingiverse, whatever the case may be, and it's way too many polys, and let's say it's converted into convert we won't do it, but let's say it's in triangles and all that sort of stuff, and you're like, this is hell. And for whatever reason, it won't reduce. What we can do is we can use this new tool called QuadDraw. And what you need to do in order to map this, you just hit the Make Object Selected Live, which is the big magnet icon. Maybe we have to do that first. So Make Object Live. So the bull is live. And we go to QuadDraw. And we go click, click, clickety click. And if I hit Shift, it's going to make a poly that will align to that mesh. So this is a really good way to make low poly topology that's really nice, that can be that will work out really nicely, that you can bring straight into Mudbox. And because it's nicely, evenly distributed, it'll just use that for the moment. See how here it's nicely contoured to the body of the bull. And if I grab that and just move it across, you can see there it's starting to make a really nice mesh. So if you do need to retopologize anything, you can have that, and then if you smooth it, you'll notice that it'll smooth really nicely to there. And I can therefore take this into Mudbox, Unreal, or whatever, and I can have my levels of detail with that, or I can deform that in Mudbox and it's not going to be a problem. See if I can bring in some nasty geometry, and then you can see the pitfalls of not having good geometry. Don't forget to turn the magnet off. Let's see if I can. So just so you know, every action here has like a hidden menu behind it. And accessing the hidden menu looks like it's about to crash mail. So just be aware of that. It's always a good reason to save stuff. Okay, here we go. Oh. Let's put it back. I suspect it's here. Sorry, if you see here on the mesh menu, if I hit the square over here, it will give me an extra set of tools generally. I'll just hit triangulate. So in previous versions, it would give you the option to triangulate. When you have it in triangulate mode, it does, so when you've got triangles, it does make it a little bit harder to deform. and it also makes it harder to go levels deeper. That was not a particularly good thing to show you because it doesn't illustrate my point. I'll try and fix it up in the break and show you again then. Trying to think of other stuff to show you. We've got the multi-cut tool, which is kind of cool. So I guess why I'm showing you all these modeling techniques is it's how you combine these modeling techniques. After the break, we'll just go through a few examples of just combining everything together. And yeah. Jesus, that's just going crazy. Multi-cut tool, if I just go like that, I can slice through things. This is very similar to the edge loop tool, except for the fact that it's kind of a bit more random. There are instances, especially when you're using organic geometry, that can be kind of useful. Again, if I hit Control E, I can extend outwards here. Let's just change the divisions to 3. Go up like, whoa, easy, tiger. Just be careful about what you're selecting. I selected 2 things at once there and I didn't like it. So just make sure you're always selecting one thing. If we go 1 here. Don't know what I'm making at the moment. Whoa. You'll notice here that it's gone, I selected 2 things at once. So always make sure you only have what you want selected. And then that will come up like that. I'm trying to think of an object just to make off the top of my head just to illustrate some of the points. So I might just make an axe head or something like that. Might be really easy. So if I start here, and I use my modifier and I squish it down like that. That's actually another tool that I should show you. So whenever you're making something symmetrical, you only ever want to do one, whenever you're making a symmetrical object, you only want to do one side of it and then mirror the other side. So we can do this a number of ways. We'll just do it quite simply. Selecting a face, do extrude. 9 might be a bit much. Let's just go 5. Select faces like that. I could just as easily select vertices if I wanted to. So if I go here and I go to vertex mode, and I just want to pull this one down a little bit like that. I want to pull this one down a little bit like that. I can do that too. Selecting a face basically selects 4 edges or 4 vertices, so it's just a lot easier. So I tend to do that. Especially if it's constrained in this mode, it's pretty good. If I want to select the edge loop here, I can do that too. You're like, this is starting to look like an axe head. Yeah, I'm gonna kind of go with that. Now, if I want to mirror that, my neck is getting completely craned doing this. I can hit mirror geometry, and then it will mirror along there really nicely. The offset point, you do it offset 0. Merge border. You'll notice that these are 1 now. Although, is there a... The better way of doing this, I'll undo that. Now I could move these together. Actually, I'll merge these together because that's actually a skill in itself. And then we'll do this, and then we'll. So ideally, you want to have this on the 0. So if I hit insert, so I'm changing. If I change my central pivot, so central pivot, object mode, so central pivot, and I hit insert now, and I move that central pivot across to the vertex there, insert, and then I move this to the X there, so it's right on the 0, 0, and therefore if I go on the menu here, I hit that, that should be perfectly aligned to that. So you'll notice that they're merged, those vertices there merged together. Now, if I do what I did before, so that's pretty good. So it's just off there, it's not great. And I go create a duplicate, and I hit 3 on here. You'll notice that they actually break apart, which isn't ideal. What I can do is I can do one of 2 things. I can hit face and face and face, and I can go bridge, and they'll bridge nicely like that. And you'll notice that as I combine them, they'll combine really nicely like that. Or alternatively, I can do it old school, which is hit vertex, and hit this vertex, I can hit this vertex, and I can combine the vertices. Merge vertices, I hit merge vertices, and you'll notice that if they're close enough, and 0.1 is close enough, it'll automatically merge those 2 vertices. So likewise with these 2, if I hit G, we'll merge them, and G and G, and we'll merge them all into one. So yeah, there you go. And if you grab one of these vertexes, if you want to check if it's merged or not, just bring it up and down. You'll notice that they're together. And you'll notice that they're together. Whoa. And you'll notice that they're together. What are we doing for time? We've got roughly 20 minutes to go. This is the time, so that's your asset there. You could probably fatten this out. While I'm doing this, if there's any stuff you want me to cover, think of something now and I'll ask in about 30 seconds. This is all going to be on the video, so chances are if you've got a problem or there's something that in my haste I didn't cover, I was covering too quickly. Do you want me to recap something or go through it a little bit slower in more detail? Just let me know. Form to that now. It's a really good blob making tool. Yeah. So this is kind of how you roll with Naios. You just kind of, it's not as much fun as Mudbox, but it's pretty simple. Like, it's very forgiving is one of the beautiful things about it. but also you're prone to make mistakes like selecting the wrong things at times. It's more like a cartoon axe than an actual axe, but realistically all I'm doing is just setting this up so I can bring this into Mudbox so I can detail this. You'll notice that there's a reasonably even amount of mesh detail here. So if I pull this across, I bring this into Mudbox, and as you've seen, no Cal, keep this mesh. That's a bit buggered. A lot of times when you do this, it's worth just killing off everything. It's because there was the mesh. If you've got interior mesh components, that's really good. You need to delete those before you can go forward. So that's where that was stuffing up. Because there was, if you recall, we had meshes inside there. And when it was simplifying it in Mudbox, that's where it was going a little bit Burko. What we might do is we might do that again, and we'll direction plus. Now, if we bring this into Mudbox, it should be super nice. Send as missing. Don't save. Smash. And you'll notice if I smooth that out, now I can start going into detail with the sculpting tools here. Bring up the strength, bring up the size. Oh, there you go. I can make like a really funky looking. Whoa. I don't want it that funky looking. I think, I forget who was, one of the students last week had issues with the sizing of things. That's one of Mudbox's real problems, is it's not adaptive sizing. So you can actually spend quite a lot of time fucking around here, getting it right. We'll cover that in the next class, but as you can see here, you're just bringing in a nice mesh that Mudbox can kind of deform it. But like I said, I'll leave the last 20 minutes for any requests, and I'll go through anything in greater detail and a little bit slower. So this is your time to shine. You've heard me bang on. Any questions? Otherwise, whoa, Sherry's falling asleep. Wow. Just a note, in lieu of, don't want anyone to have assault charges on them, but if someone is falling asleep, maybe just give them a gentle nudge. Yeah. So, Sherry, any questions? You got all that, right? I've covered quite a lot of ground. I've kind of jumped from point to point just in terms of what I thought was logical. And as I was saying to Dan on the weekend, it was really lovely working with Dan on a project, and having someone who saw things with fresh eyes really made me stop and contemplate the way that I do things, and forced me to go back to basics and to review best practices to do things as well, and understanding that Maya is only one point in the pipeline. That, as we're saying, it's going to go to Mudbox, it's going to go into UV mapping, it's going to go into Substance Painter, but ultimately it has to end up in Unreal and perform to 90 frames a second. So that's what we're chasing. Again, the floor is yours. It's a great opportunity to ask questions, and I'm happy to dig a lot deeper on something and go articulate something a lot better. Don't be shy. Ask away. Yes, Larry.
Generally, just thinking about the workflow within So when is the time that we start to kind of setting the smooth? Is it after we kind of having a low resolution mesh? And
Great question.
Right time to start?
That is a great question. Depending on how much detail you're going to do. So, as part of this assignment that I'll tell you all about after the break, because I know you're all excited to get started on it. Certain objects will be you're going to have a whole heap of low poly meshes, and then you're going to have a handful of high detail meshes that you can do in Mudbox. Listening here, this might apply to you. So my take on it is that you should always flick between the two. So go from 1 to 3 to 1 to 3 just to make sure your design intent is being met. If you know the object is only going to be in Maya, always flick between, regardless, always flick between the two, right? If you know that it's going to go into Mudbox, you don't need to worry about it so much. You just need to make sure the topology is nice. And again, what I mean by nice topology is it's all quads, it's all relatively evenly spaced. You could probably put in a couple more cuts in here and here. In fact, I'll do that now. And you'll note I can do that with on any angle there, so that's nice and even. That's what I'm always chasing. But at all times, just flick between 1 and 3. That would be my suggestion. And if it looks good as 3, that step there might not be super nice. So I can just grab that one there and bring it across there and even it out, and now it's got a nicer bit of curvature. But as a general rule, it should work well regardless. So always be checking. Great question. Great question, Larry. Anyone else got some good questions? Got 15 more minutes. Oh no, we got student first. Yes.
So,
Sure.
in actual practice,
Yeah.
they use Maya to model architectural buildings and all that, right?
Yes.
So, but then there you use dimensions and all that.
Yeah, you can use dimensions. What's more commonly done is that you'll get, say, a elevation, or you'll get a plan view in AutoCAD, and then you'll just snap to those points. So as we did with the curves before, you can just really, generally they're already designed. I don't know if designers are designing directly in Maya these days. I suspect some firms might be, but back in the day when I did architectural visualization, we'd get the files from the architects and they all came in as AutoCAD files, and then we'd we'd use those curves or lines to inform our model making.
So it's like based on the camera, you just do two faces or something.
Yeah, well, the architectural stuff that I was working on tended to be quite rectilinear, so just like, as you can see here, you just extrude upwards. We did have custom-built plugins that we could literally just grab a whole lot of architectural lines and hit one button, and it would extrude to the height of that, to the ceiling, basically. And that's, in architectural practice, that's what we did. Now, depending on what firm you work for, depending on if you're just doing the visualization or if you're using that data, I'd imagine Revit plugs in, depending on how you get the data from Revit and Rhino, you might just use that data. So it depends. There's no one way of doing it. There are several. But yeah, you can, just to explain that a little bit better, let's say you've got a cube, let's say you've got a square, and that could be a DXF brought in from AutoCAD. and I hit, oh, why aren't I able to select that? That's completely odd. Sometimes, okay, just object mode, might delete you for a sec. Let's say we wanted to extrude upwards. Oh, for God's sake, now it's going to make a fool of me. Again, I hit extrude. This is just going to go bananas. I apologize. I haven't set this up right. There you go. You can, as you can see, it will extrude upwards. We had a plugin that would do it automatically. So a lot of plugins are just scripts that when you work for a studio, you'll just select all the lines in AutoCAD. All the imported DXFs or DWGs from AutoCAD, and you hit a button and it will extrude upwards, and you just say, what is the ceiling height, and it will pop up. That's how I did it in practice. How every practice works is a little bit differently. But yeah, long story short, Maya isn't great with NURBS. It's much better for polymodeling. But when you need them, occasionally it works. Not all the time. Any other questions? That was really great. Before Dan chimes in. Come on.
That's a question for everyone.
Okay.
What do we have to consider at this point when we're modeling to be able to achieve good texture mapping for materials?
We're going to get into that next great question. We're going to get into that next class, and it's all going to be about UV theory. So, yeah, well done. Jumping the gun there, sir, but that's all right. Loss.
Okay. In terms of saving file.
Yeah.
Because you already export to Mapbox.
Yeah.
I have to save both of them, right?
Save both of them? Yeah, so you can save both of them as FBX.
Oh, they all are FBX.
Yeah. Yeah. So everything that we're going to do for Unreal, all FBX. Rhino stuff, save in Rhino native format. Anything NURBS related, I'm just saying this now. Everything, so FBX is the weapon of choice or the file of choice for Unreal. You can use OBJs, you can use a slew of other things, but everything that we bring across will be in FBX. The file formats for the textures will be PSTs and targets. And we'll go through that a little bit later on, but just for your benefit. Windows, sometimes depending on your version of Maya, you might have to go into the plugin manager, which probably isn't going to work because it wasn't working before, and hit FBX. We'll cover that later. I don't know why it's not working, but that's fine. I might be due for a restart. That's another thing. Anytime that Maya starts going a bit crazy, just restart it. Restart the computer. Anything else? We've got 9 minutes.